Welcome to the second webinar in the MLA update series this year. So welcome to the Redefining Resilience through Sustainability session. Sustainability couldn't be more important for the red meat industry. And we think about the drivers and those important priorities out of the Red Meat 2030 plan. Our people, our customers, consumers, livestock, our markets and systems, and of course environment. They're all critical pillars that we need to make sure that we support and strengthen for Australian red meat to be trusted and sought after protein, not just in Australia but around the world. MLA's environmental sustainability program creates opportunities to efficiently and effectively manage soil health, water, methane emissions, biodiversity and climate variability, which is one of the key things for building resilience and prosperity for our industry. In today's session, we'll hear from 5 speakers. So Mick Crowley, who's the MLA General Manager for Research, Development and Adoption. He'll be facilitating today's session and also speak about investing in off-farm and on-farm sustainability. Michael Lee is MLA's Group Manager for Science and Innovation, and he'll tell us what economic sustainability looks like post-farm gate. Doug McNicholl, who I'm sure many of you have come across in the sustainability space, is the MLA Program Manager for Sustainability and Innovation. He'll discuss environmental stewardship and the CN30 program, along with Victorian sheep and cattle producer Fiona Conroy. So welcome, Fiona. And then David Beatty, the MLA Group Manager for Productivity and Animal Wellbeing, will talk to us about what MLA is doing to improve animal welfare. At the end of today's session, there'll be an opportunity for questions as part of the Q&A panel discussion. And there's a Zoom toolbar with a Q&A feature on it. You just click on that Q&A feature and you can type your question in there, and Mick will facilitate those questions at the end of the session. We may not have time to answer all those questions while we're in the session. So please keep an eye on the updates website, which is the updates.mla.com.au, and we'll publish the remaining answers along with the webinar recording in the coming days. If there's any major technical difficulty, or if we lose connection, we'll reconnect, and if necessary, we'll email another link out immediately so we can get reconnected. The presenters will have their cameras and microphones on, no one else will. So if you want to engage or ask a question or comment, then use the Q&A or the chat functions. Thank you for joining us today. Please sit back and enjoy the session, and look forward to hearing from our 5 speakers. Over to you, Mick.
Thanks very much, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. When we're talking about the context of this afternoon in terms of sustainability, and also under the theme of resilience, we know that the industry is incredibly resilient. Resilience is at the heart of everything that you do within your businesses on a day-to-day basis. Lauren, if you want to just move on to the next slide. Everyone's had to work through drought, fires, floods, in some cases all 3. Through the course of this year, working with the disruption that COVID-19 has caused us all. But everyone has, worked through these challenges. And when we were thinking about the theme of resilience, it's also looking at how do we now move ahead, and how does that resilience set us up for the future? How do we become more innovative? And what investments do we need to make to set up the industry for the future disruptions, but getting ahead of those issues and setting us up for the future? So if you just move ahead for me, Lauren, and the way which we're thinking about this is definitely in a whole farm context, as well as looking at the whole supply chain. When we're thinking about sustainability, I just want to remind everyone that we're talking about the broader definition of sustainability. It's productivity and profitability. It's the social components, animal welfare, as well as environment, and our flagship investments in CN30 you'll hear more about today. But when we look at what does success look like, it will be driven by productivity. Productivity will ensure that we have money to invest back into the system improving productivity has good animal welfare outcomes. We have to have healthy and productive animals to deliver a profitable business. We then have to look after the land and the environment within which we operate. So it goes without saying that the whole system needs to work together. If you missed yesterday's webinar, there'll be links to the producer innovation piece. And today, when Michael Lee gets into his section, he'll talk about some of the investments in the post-farm gate space, and that will all connect together, thinking about the whole supply chain, how we create and capture value. So we might move into Michael's presentation now, and Michael will talk about the connection with our investments in the post-farm gate sector, and think about how those investments create and capture value for our livestock producers. So Michael, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Mick, and good afternoon, everybody. Building on the success that we do on farm around our research, the science and innovation team predominantly do a lot of work off farm, and central to that work is really that idea around how do we get more from less. So how do we use that wider definition of sustainability and really drive reducing cost of production, but importantly also growing demand. Today, I'd just like to take the opportunity to step through a couple of key focus areas that the team is working on, and they relate to the automation and the objective measurement program. So here we'll see the role of data and automation crossing over both traceability, but also selecting the right cut at the right time. And that also builds into some work that we're just about to start around inventory management. And again, looking at how the service level of product to our customers is optimized, but also how do we do this in a cost-effective way and a consistent way. The other thing that we'll touch on is how do we look at using the so-called waste streams and these lower value cuts and components and reimagine them in a different way. So whether that's, the common things like fertilizers and feed, all the way through to new products. And so we'll touch on a couple of programs known as Waste to Profit, and also give you an idea of things like what are some alternative uses for hides and how do we get more from less by looking at different markets and different product solutions, again, for these so-called waste streams. And that's around the idea of upcycling and circular economy. So starting with automation, now for a number of years, the MLA donor company in particular has been funding work in the lamb automation space. And what we found here is the trigger really for automation isn't about labor savings. It is around about the value and the yield that you can get for getting the right cutting lines and having sensor technology, like things like DEXA and X-ray technology, to be able to get the right cut, to consistently produce that right cut, and then to be able to trace that the whole way through and really learn from the data that gets produced. So in past sessions, we've talked about the value of the lamb automation program. Today is around about $8 a head. And now we're just about to start the journey and have already started the journey in the beef automation space. And here we're looking at around $20 to $30 a head benefit by looking at automation, looking at objective measurement in ways, as I said, to use more from less, to get the right cutting lines, to marry that up to the right market specs, and to optimize floor space and reduce things like energy costs and labor costs that are typically associated with what we need to move towards, which is a more modern meat processing facility. The picture on the right is the term we call RoboDoc, and this is an area of work where we're looking at reducing things like carton damage, getting port mark correct, essentially getting the right product to the right market at the right time. And when you look at these types of part of our value chain, they're typically very labor intensive. And, let's be honest, there's sometimes mistakes that happens that impacts on market access and others. And so we're seeing how could automation improve these types of sectors and really capture that value and create that value, and then capture that value back along the value chain by the means of automation. The next program I just wanted to touch on is the Waste to Profit program. And this is an activity that It's being led by QUT and also in collaboration with the Australian Pork Limited here. And this is an opportunity where we're looking at wastewater, we're looking at the waste that comes from livestock production, and really looking at novel technology platforms that create new feed, new fertilizers, new sources to run energy in that sustainable way. And very much it's solving those real complex problems, but seeing how we can create new business models and new services for these so-called waste streams of our sector. So again, you won't see meat products coming out of here, but what we will see is new revenue streams that really look to empower companies to look at new value streams for the so-called waste streams. So we might touch on this in some of the CN30 work that Doug will shortly talk to in the next session. But when we think about other waste streams, we think about also how can that go beyond a fertilizer or feeds into food products. And here we look at that wider mega trend around, there are many consumers that want sustainable credentials. So if we look at something like a hide or a skin today, for many, many years that has sort of gone to the leather market or making sausage casings or making things like gelatin for sugar industries. But when we look at what the components or the ingredients inside that hide or skin are, it's very, very high in collagen. And the picture on the show that at the moment there is some beauty food products. So there are a lot of customers out there today that are looking for wellness and health and beauty solutions that probably aren't connecting that to red meat. Yet inside the components of hide and skins are indeed these protein peptides. So we're looking at not just can it be produced, but can it be produced where Australia might have a point of difference? So can we use it a new sustainable way, with less chemicals? Can we produce a high quality collagen protein peptide? And then how might that be positioned in products that are perhaps sold more at Priceline than they are sold in the meat department? The next picture is some work that we did with kidney and channel fat out of goat. So we actually looked at how that could be transformed into beauty cream products. So again, a face balm cream from essentially a low value or waste stream product out of goats. And now for many years, we have seen gland meat and thyroids, but traditionally it hasn't been Australian. And this example here, we've worked with a company looking at an Australian grass-fed call-out of supplements and looking at technology such as freeze drying that can produce high quality and again, more sustainable practices. And these types of solutions, I just wanted to give you a flavor of the types of new products that are essentially being derived from these low value waste streams. Today, around 20% of the cuts actually contribute to about 80% of the value out of a carcass. So all that hard work, all that high quality that is happening on farm around animal welfare and sustainability, there's this great opportunity that we can look at those types of credentials, but imagined in a new product occasion. So whether it's beauty foods or creams or tablets, there are many consumers that want those credentials and traits, and it's about how we can capture those types of bundles of services into new products. The other example I wanted to briefly touch on is some work we did with a Chicago company early this year, and that's in the pet food sector. And so again, the red meat industry for many of years has supplied ingredients into pet food. But the examples on show there are around $60 or $70 US a kilo, so very, very high value. And how that was achieved was actually by using and tapping into food waste. So the examples there talk about an upcycle ingredient. So this company's getting value by repurposing lobster shells, banana peels, so product that is typically a food waste. And we've looked at the credentials of a clean, green, true Aussie beef and also some goat and lamb variants and married that up against some upcycled food waste ingredient. So this whole humanization of pet food is a large mega trend that's looking at how consumers, drivers for themselves, actually cross over to drivers for their whole family. And that does include the dog. And so how do we look at new technology and new business opportunities to upcycle our ingredients? And there are some really promising signs by unpacking that wider food waste trend, and the meat industry has a role to play there. The last slide I just wanted to touch on was some of the work that we're doing that's building on the CN30, the carbon neutral work and low carbon meat work that's being done on farm. And here we tested with some consumers, some prototypes, some concepts to really understand some attitudes around trust. So if the credentials on farm could achieve carbon neutrality, what might that look like? How does that compare to other brands? Where does it fit in terms of organics, for example? Where does it fit in terms of the premium MSA grades? So it's just some discovery piece there to try and understand that value capture that could happen with credentials around low carbon or carbon neutral meat. The second example is the tray that you see in the picture there is actually a plastic-free tray made out of food and meat waste. So here we're seeing consumers who are and brand owners who are very conscious of reducing plastic waste. Yet if those that obviously know the industry well, we use a lot of plastic in our industry to get to the many markets that we need and in a format like trays to consumers. So how might a true Aussie clean green of the future product, what role would packaging play in that? Does that packaging need to be clean and green as well? Does it need to be plastic free? And so here we made a tray that was actually quite comparable in cost and functionality to a standard plastic tray, but made 100% out of food waste, including meat waste. So I just wanted to give a flavour of some of the activities that we've got underway in the team, and I suppose highlight that, yes, there are challenges around cost of production. There are opportunities and challenges around sustainability, but at the heart of it, it's really understanding how we can use more from less and use solutions and technologies that we can get higher value from all the cuts and carcasses. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Some really great insights there and innovations that you're investing in. Look, I look forward to talking to you a bit more about that in the panel session. And if anyone on the webinar does have questions, please put them into the Q&A function. So you'll need to use the Q&A and not the chat. Put them into the Q&A and we'll work our way through those when we get to the panel session. It's with my pleasure to now introduce Doug McNicholl and Fiona Conroy to you to look at the investments that are being made in our flagship initiative around CN30 and some other environmental stewardship initiatives. And then, Fiona will take us through her lived experience in her property. So, Doug, I'll hand over to you, and yeah, we're in your hands.
Thanks, Mick, and thanks, Michael Lee and Michael Crowley, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you. I hope you're enjoying your afternoon. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just giving you an overview of the Australian red meat industry's carbon neutral 2030 roadmap, and then you're going to hear from Fiona, who's going to delve into, as Michael said, her lived experience of some technologies and practices that are delivering some win-wins for her business. Now, MLA, in collaboration with industry, government, and voluntary investment partners, is investing in technology as well as marketing and communication activities to enable industry to move from where we are today into a carbon neutral future. Now, there are 4 key work areas that we've developed under the carbon neutral 2030 roadmap, and it all begins with industry leadership. And that's, for example, investing in education and training initiatives for producers, but also some key stakeholder groups to establish their knowledge and understanding of technologies and practices and policy and science, but more importantly, convert that into business value. There's also some very important work areas that are more technology related. So on one hand, there's technologies that are driving emissions reduction, and at the same time, driving emissions reduction in a profitable and a productive way. Alongside that, technologies that can promote carbon storage, and that's predominantly in grazing lands. So some examples of greenhouse gas emissions technologies that deliver multiple benefits are things like the new and emerging feed supplements, as well as forages that have been proven through R&D over an extended period that much precedes my time in the organisation. that's shown great promise for enteric methane mitigation and livestock productivity. And similarly, on the carbon storage side, some examples of technologies are actually agricultural technologies, so specifically plants, legumes, deep-rooted perennial pastures, shade and shelter belts that can deliver multiple benefits to producers. And alongside that, technologies that enable measurement of things like soil carbon. We also know that the technologies are great, and that's ultimately what creates impact. But we also have created a work area that enables the integration of the outputs of those technologies into farm and also value chain systems thinking. So we're calling that the Integrated Management Systems work area. And there's some examples of activities undergoing in that area are things like new and emerging ways of measuring and accounting for emissions in our system. Because I know a number of stakeholders listening today have been very interested in looking at the emerging science for accounting for livestock-related emissions. But we know that if we do all of those things really well across those 4 work areas, the work undertaken by CSIRO has shown that we can unlock multiple benefits for industry, demonstrated environmental stewardship, increased profitability, increased animal productivity. It's all synergistic work. Now, some of you might be asking, so what do we need to achieve and when do we need to achieve it? So we've put some thoughts down around key stretch targets for the industry to achieve from now into the mid of the decade and out to 2030. And should be no surprise that we're really honing in now on increasing industry's awareness and understanding of science and technology in this area. So we spent a period of time in the last 12 months working with producers through some pilot carbon accounting workshops, and that's enabled the next iteration of carbon accounting tools for producers. Now, we've been told that much more work is required. The tools have probably 4 or 5 iterations left in front of them over the coming years, and we'll be continuing to work on that. But we've also, through that work, enabled the development of some carbon accounting modules that we can make available to extension and adoption programs like profitable grazing systems. And we'd expect that to be available to the industry early next year. But then if we start to look into the mid of the decade, it's very important that the technologies that are undergoing research, development and validation at the moment, things like the livestock supplements that will hit the market for feedlots targeting 2023, 2024, need to be available within that time frame. At the same time, we need to be continuing the work that we started with the federal government, developing the scientific methods that enable carbon credits to be created, or at least have those carbon emissions attributed to the producers and the feedlotters who generate them alongside their high value red meat they'll continue to produce. Out to 2025, we would expect some much larger scale adoption of savanna fire management methods in Northern Australia. There's been some significant uptake of that already, but we would expect much larger uptake of those methods. And some examples of that are using cool burns to avoid nitrous oxide and methane emissions that would otherwise be released if hot burns were to persist. We get out to 2030 and you could see some really aspirational stretch targets for industry. So specifically, 25 million hectares of new legume establishment across Australia's grazing lands. And 25 million hectares seems a large number, but when you consider there's 355 million hectares of grazing land in Australia, it's not so big. And we also, when you consider the significant livestock improvement, productivity improvements alongside soil nitrogen fixation and soil carbon sequestration, it becomes a no-brainer. The logic falls out. Also extending supplements into extensive grazing systems. So from feedlots initially in the mid part of the decade, and then investing in the development of technology to deliver them into the breeder herds into extensive grazing systems. Are some examples of some key stretch targets for industry out to 2030. But I'll repeat again, the primary investment focus for MLA is investing in technologies that deliver multiple benefits, because we understand that's what the industry has told us is important to underpin the sustainable development of the industry. Now, there are also 3 key key factors that need to come into play for the industry to be successful in the year 2030. And it will be no surprise to some of you. Industry commitment that underpins motivation for people to act in this area. So we've seen the Red Meat Advisory Council through its 2030 Red Meat Advisory Council's Red Meat 2030 strategy set the aspirational goal of doubling the value of red meat sales alongside achieving a carbon neutral position. We've seen some policy settings start to come to the fore. Industry has set its own goal in this area, as well as the Commonwealth and state governments. Now, the Commonwealth targets are less than industry. The state targets are similar, but in different timeframes. And we would expect a convergence of those policies and being required for our industry to be successful. Underneath those policy settings are some very important funding sources. So no surprise that the research and development corporations are leading the investment on behalf of industry, and I'll touch on MLA specific investments in a moment. We've also seen businesses taking action through voluntary markets for carbon credits, voluntary markets for low and zero carbon branded meat and other co-products. We look at the federal funding sources that underpin the policy settings, the federal government's Emissions Reduction Fund, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. And all of those mechanisms have really started to turn their focus to agriculture because they recognise the significant opportunity that exists for agriculture to cost effectively reduce emissions and also remain an economically viable industry. And now, obviously, new investment in research, development and adoption is required. Now you can see some bar charts here, and in the deep blue is investments made or committed through the MLA donor company, and the light blue represents levy investment. Now it might come as a surprise to some of you that the significant amount of investment that's occurring in this initiative is actually through voluntary contributions through the MLA donor company. So committed out until 2025 is just over $20 million of investment, majority of that through the MLA donor company. We also have in the pipeline $60 odd million of investment proposals sitting on our desks for evaluation across the business. But we also know through what economic work undertaken by CSIRO that we're required to invest an additional $150 million out to 2030. And you can see the majority of that will be formed through investment partnerships. Now, before I hand over to Fiona, if you'd like any further detail around the carbon neutral 2030 roadmap, as of today, we've released a document that details the roadmap and describes the pathways at a greater level of detail. We'd encourage you to log on, check it out, and while you're there, check out the tools and resources and please provide feedback. We recognise the two-way dialogue required as these roadmaps evolve. So I'm going to hand over to Fiona now to talk through her lived experience of technologies and practices on her farm. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Fiona Conroy, and my husband Cam Nicholson and I farm on the Bellarine Peninsula. There's a picture of our farm there in the corner. We run 200 breed plan recorded Angus females. We produce feeder steers, which go to Ranges Valley, and we also run a fine wool merino flock. We farm near the coast, and we've undergone a fairly major farm development program over the last 30 years. We started with a farm that was basically unimproved, had poor soil fertility, was almost bare of trees, had some pretty major gully erosion and was pretty unproductive. And so we set about a program aimed at obviously increasing production to become more profitable and more productive. And part of that program included pasture improvement, soil fertility, and an integral part of it was tree planting. As you can see in that photo, we're right near the coast and it's pretty windswept and ordinary. So right from the beginning, we were thinking of trees. And this is 25, 30 years ago. There were still discussions about carbon credits and greenhouse emissions back then. And the original intention with the trees was not just to provide shelter, but potentially allow us to tap into carbon credits in the future. So our average rainfall is about 550 mils, but it varies from 371 to about 890. It's pretty variable. So part of our farm improvement program, in one case, because it was unimproved, we were pretty lucky we didn't have very many established fences. So we were in a unique position. We could go in and start re-fencing. It was a long, slow, expensive progress, but we went in and did land class fencing based on soil type. We also, wherever we had an opportunity, we'd put a double fence in and whack in some trees. We fenced off our watercourses and gullies, put them into trees. We've double fenced with our neighbours and put them into trees. We reticulated water, and then on the different soil types based on our land class fencing, we put in different pasture species. We went from having annual pastures to phalaris to fescue-based pastures, perennial ryegrass-based pastures, and some lucerne-based pastures. And that allowed us to spread our growing season. We also had a fairly major pasture fertiliser program, which allowed us to take our Olsen P, which was about 10 in the early 90s, up to about 18, which is our target range. And we've taken our potassium coal K up to from about 100 to 180. And we've also used a fair bit of lime to get our pH up from 4.7 to 5.2. And that's all increased our pasture production. The smaller paddocks with the reticulated water have also allowed us to practice a fair bit of rotational grazing. We've got small paddocks, we move stock regularly, and we've now taken our stocking rate from about 8 DSEs to hectare up to about 21 DSEs per hectare. So one of the things we've noticed, apart from increasing production, is that we've seen a pretty substantial increase in soil health. And we've been measuring pastures regularly. I've got a husband who's an agronomist, which is a bit of a bonus. But we measure everything, and we do soil tests in every paddock every third year. So for almost 30 odd years, we've got a bank of soil test results, which not only include fertility levels, but they also include soil organic carbon. So if you look in that top left-hand corner, that was the sort of soil we started with. We had a pretty plain clay loam, grey clay loam sitting over a pretty hostile podzol sort of clay subsoil. We didn't get a lot of root penetration and we didn't have a lot of organic matter. In that graph down the bottom, you can see that's our organic carbon levels have trended up from about 2.3 heading towards 3. They've gone up to 3.2, I think, in some paddocks, but that's across all our paddocks. They do bounce around a bit from year to year, and a lot of that's got to do with rainfall. The research that has been put out shows that soil carbon is limited by your soil type, your rainfall and growing conditions, and how you manage it. And everything points to our soil carbon levels plateauing out around about that 3%. So we're sort of hitting maximum capacity then. On the right-hand side, you can see what we've actually achieved in terms of soil structure and soil health. We've gone from annual pastures to deep-rooted perennial pastures. We've had a massive improvement in soil structure and soil health. We've got more earthworms, we've got dung beetles, we've got better cation exchange capacity, and we've got much better water penetration. It's quite a big change. So it's been a significant benefit in terms of productivity coming along with soil carbon. But the one thing I suppose we've looked at in recent years is what our carbon balance is for the whole property. And I suppose this is in response to some of the stuff you keep hearing in the media that beef production's bad for the environment and contributing greenhouse gases and you've got to eat less meat. So this was something that we did more for out of our own interest. We're also one of the pilot study farms that Doug mentioned in the MLA carbon accounting project. But this is some calculations we've done. And I suppose we've used some of the existing models. So on the left of the screen is our greenhouse gas emissions. And it includes livestock, fertiliser and fuel. But the really clear thing is that 97% of our emissions are coming from livestock. Really, fertiliser and electricity and diesel have really very little contribution to our overall carbon emissions. But on the other side, we've looked at where are we storing carbon. We've got 9% of our farm now under trees, and those trees are now accounting for a pretty significant component of our carbon sequestration. In fact, it's 44% of the total amount of carbon we're sequestering. We've also looked at all the soil data we've taken, which is almost getting close to 300 soil tests, and we can see that soil carbon is a significant component. So when we look at our total carbon storage, we can see that we're actually storing more carbon than we're emitting. That's where we are at the moment. Now, those tree figures are based on trees that we've planted that have all been actively growing, and as trees mature, when they hit their full capacity of growth, they do start dropping off their ability to store carbon. But that's using figures from Richard Eckard from the Melbourne University. And as I said, look, we're also tapering off on our ability to store soil carbon, but at this stage, we're still well ahead in terms of storing more carbon than we sequester. But one of the things you've really got to look at is, as I said, most of your emissions are coming from livestock. So you've really got to look at how can you manage your livestock emissions. And I suppose we've looked at this in terms of beef produced, which is on the left-hand side and the yellow line, and how much carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of beef we're producing, which is the blue line. Now, the range with all the research shows that you're going to be somewhere between 8 and 12 kilograms of CO2 per kilograms of beef, but you can manage it and manipulate things. So what we've found is that we've got to look really carefully at how we're producing beef in terms of we need to make sure that animals are productive. We can't afford to have animals walking around belching and emitting methane if they're not contributing to the overall productivity of our herd. And we've done that by trying to optimise growth rates, looking at genetics. We put a lot of pressure on fertility. We want everything to calve unassisted as a 2-year-old heifer and get back in calf as a 3-year-old. You don't want to be culling females and having them on the place contributing to your overall emissions bottom line if they're not performing. But I think this graph also shows that things bounce up and down a bit. Those bits where beef production has dropped and our carbon emissions have gone up have been in extremely dry years. And I suppose that's just highlighting that if you're not achieving good growth rates, or you're turning animals off earlier because you're running into a dry season, you'll tend to find that your carbon intensity bounces up and down. It's just an important thing to keep in mind. You've got to be very productive in terms of how you're producing your livestock and how they perform. But I think, look, we probably, as I mentioned, trees are a major contributor to our carbon sequestration in terms of the percentage of the farm that they cover, but they also provide enormous benefits in terms of animal welfare. There's been plenty of research to show that cattle don't cope well with heat, and we've got black cattle. In terms of fertility and milk production, we calve in spring and we have animals lactating over summer, and we also join in early summer. We need to have animals wanting to find ideal temperatures and shade to optimise grass consumption, productivity, milk production, and ensure that we have fertility, because heat can affect embryo loss and bull performance. We also have merino ewes that we're joining in March, and you certainly notice when you've got trees, you've got animals seeking shade. It gives them a much nicer environment, and I'm sure it contributes to their bottom line. We also lamb ewes in little paddocks surrounded by trees, and we reduce wind chill factor on lambs, so that's another important thing. Another important aspect of this whole sustainability and managing climate change, I think, is that by putting in lots of trees and managing things like watercourses and reducing stock access, we're increasing biodiversity values. When we started out with the farm and the farm development program, we were thinking about carbon credits as a potential income source in the future. And I think it became clear when we started looking at our figures and getting an awareness of where the industry is going, that we really should be focusing on covering our own emissions rather than trying to necessarily sell credits to somebody else. But I can see potential in biodiversity credits being something that may be an asset in the future. I think the other thing that's important to remember is that the tree planting, the biodiversity, having happy animals is really important for making it a nice place to work as a landholder and a livestock producer. I certainly feel better when I'm going around dealing with livestock and moving stock and checking things, to have a nice working environment. And just one other thing that I've really think is important as well, and we probably don't talk about it much at all, is there's a biosecurity asset in having trees and fencing off watercourses. We've fenced off all our boundary fences with neighbours and roads. Stock can't access water that's draining from properties adjoining us. And it's certainly one of those things I think we need to keep in mind. But there's a lot of benefits in terms of better environmental management, in terms of being carbon neutral, but also providing animal welfare and biodiversity.
Thanks so much, Fiona, and some really great messages that you've left with us there, and probably a pretty good segue actually into our final speaker today, with David Beatty going to take us through how we're looking at improving animal welfare through the investments we make in our research and development. So I'll hand over to David, and we're in your hands, David.
Thanks, Mick. It was a great segue, actually, and unplanned as well. So thank you, Fiona. You mentioned having happy animals, which is, I guess, a great lead into me covering off on improving animal welfare and how that fits into the resilience piece. So recognising the West Australians on the line, I'll say good morning, everyone, instead of good afternoon. But what I'd like to work through today is a little bit around what I've describing as an R&D challenge when we're talking about animal wellbeing. A bit of a snapshot of our current activities that I guess help build the picture of resilience, and then a little bit about the future as well. So just to try and set the scene, I think particularly with the animal wellbeing area, we do as an industry have a challenge. We obviously need to recognise the producer and the both profitability and efficiencies, and how that fits with both animal health and welfare. So what we can do to improve animal health and welfare in order to capture a dollar. Then we need to understand where the industry is going with that, and then we also need to be listening to the consumer. So if at MLA, we obviously have an agreed and robust and transparent producer consultation framework, which allows producers to have their say around how levies are spent. And we certainly try and encourage feedback both ways to make sure we are considering the animal wellbeing component. The industry, as Jason mentioned right up front, has an agreed 2030 vision. And I think the important part to recognise there is we set the standard for world-class animal health, welfare and biosecurity and production practices. So obviously the industry has a real clear vision of where we want to go. And then we need to listen. The third part of this challenge is to listen to the consumer. And, over a number of years now around consumer research and tracking that, animal welfare continues to be a real consideration for people who are purchasing red meat. So I think as a challenge from an R&D perspective is how do we bring this all together? And I think that then becomes if we can get that right, that becomes the resilience piece from an animal wellbeing perspective. So just today, I want to talk about animal wellbeing, I think, rather than animal health and welfare. In the past, these have been considered separately, but I think they're so interdependent on one another that the concept of animal wellbeing is a better way to, I guess, describe how we look after animals' health and welfare. Our R&D program at MLA covers a lot of areas, from parasite control and pain management, infectious disease, reproductive management and biosecurity. But for today, I think just to give some examples around the resilience piece is I really wanted to focus on pain management, vaccine development and biosecurity. Starting off on pain management, this has been an ongoing focus for the program for a number of years. And, resilience from a red meat production system perspective is that we're not vulnerable to criticism from the consumer side or from the activist side. So it's really important that we are continuing to have a focus on pain and husbandry procedures, and with that we get that sort of social buy-in from the consumer side. So I think from a industry perspective, we can have confidence that our research has been designed around protecting and maintaining that sort of holistic supply chain. Some examples of work that we've done over the past is investing in the development of buckalgesic. We've done some, there's some really exciting work around transdermal non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, so ketoprofen. How can we get an oral administration of that rather than an injectable form? But I guess a key part is that we do also need to acknowledge that we do need to explore new and novel approaches for pain. Pain is something that is both acute and chronic, and we need to recognise that we need either multimodal actions of pain relief or products that can be a lot more longer acting in duration. So we certainly we're not shying away from that from an R&D perspective. I think the other point I wanted to touch on here is around the measuring, demonstrating and improving that animal wellbeing. So we have a range of R&D activities looking at objective measures of animal welfare. So with that is also, I guess, the pain perspective. How do we change that subjectivity or understanding the subjective nature of pain or welfare and transferring that into more of objective measures? So, then we can benchmark and continually improve, largely funded through the MLA donor company. We're also conscious of being able to use producer demonstration sites to support those husbandry procedures around demonstrating how pain relief may impact the welfare of the animal, plus any possible economic benefits that might be associated with that. So we have producer demonstration sites looking at, particularly in the north, around capturing those husbandry procedures, castration, dehorning, looking at best management practice, and then trying to map that with performance. We're also doing some work with livestock advisors, so trying to get that message to farm consultants and farm advisors that there is a real need for producers to be looking at pain relief and how best to manage those painful procedures on farm. The other piece is that we had a little bit of work around looking at mulesing, more around the economic benefits or the economic impact of phasing out mulesing, and there are a couple of producer demonstration sites as well, trying to evaluate or understanding more shifting from a mulesing to a non-mulesing system, and that's again linked in with looking at that economic benefit of doing that. I guess a success story from a pain management perspective is the numbnuts product. I've just used this as an example, really, to both demonstrate that it's the research that has been done, but also to acknowledge that it does take a long time to go from an idea or concept through to commercialisation. But over a number of years, going back 10 or 12 years now, was the concept, and now we have a commercial product which is being used in the marketplace. So that's fantastic, and there's now over 800,000 lambs were marked, I think, using numbnuts over the last sort of 12 months, which is a terrific story. Just moving on to vaccines and vaccine development. This, I think, is a clear an area where we can actually link a producer need. So there's a producer benefit there from a productivity or health perspective, and linking that back also to the consumer thoughts around welfare. But particularly with the first example I've got up there, which is looking at developing a single-shot, long-acting anti-fertility vaccine, but particularly for the northern cattle, industry, the ability to be able to use a vaccine to render either a bull or a heifer or a cow infertile would be a real game changer for the north. So we have a number of active and another actual project just coming forward right now to look at to continue work in that area. And I think we're getting closer and closer to having some success there. We've done work in the past, and again, there's some exciting opportunities around Johne's disease. There's with the pink eye vaccine development, there's been work in there around current and future work to develop a pink eye vaccine. And the other one, I think, which is really important, is tick vaccine work. So, we recognise there's been a number of surveys and reports done around recognising cattle tick is the costliest endemic health issue for cattle producers, particularly in the north. We've had tick guard vaccines in the past, and they've been very efficient, but the need to be able to have to vaccinate cattle, regularly 3 or 4 weeks apart is obviously not sustainable for a northern cattle industry. So the search continues for a commercially viable tick vaccine, and we're tackling that in 3 areas. So there's some novel and exciting research in that space as well. And I think just recently in our annual investment call, recognising from a producer priorities perspective, we've put out terms of reference for a scaleworm vaccine, which will be exciting for the sheep industry. Just moving to biosecurity, and this obviously is a key part of our portfolio as well, largely invested with AHA or co-investing with other either RDCs or institutions, because of the fact that it does just impact more than the red meat industry. I guess when we talk about biosecurity, it's really important to think that we're not just talking about those exotic diseases and potentially maintaining our market access freedom from things like foot and mouth, African swine fever. Biosecurity really starts on farm, and being able to demonstrate that we can control endemic diseases, I think, is really important. We, as I mentioned before, our commitments for biosecurity are really driven largely through the Centre for Invasive Species Solutions. So the portfolios there are looking at wild dogs, pigs, weeds, and potentially feral cats as well in the next iteration of the CIS, as we call it. So our commitments there are around $500,000 each year, and that's a co-contribution. Well, that's our contribution, but obviously there's a lot of others contributing to that platform. We have a number of, we're involved in a rural R&D for profit project around foot and mouth disease preparedness, again, with a whole other range of contributing partners, but we lead that project. And I think the other important thing, or just one other thing that really for interest is some exciting work using Wolbachia as it's an intracellular bacteria. It's been used really successfully in the past to try and control dengue fever in humans, but taking that idea or concept and trying to use it as a control for buffalo fly is an exciting piece of research as well. So just to try and wrap things up and I guess paint a picture for the future, we've got a number of research projects and technologies that are evolving and moving relatively quickly. So technologies are moving fast. We've got the ability now to look at remote sensing and capture animal welfare behaviours. We've got a whole range of projects looking at objective measures of animal welfare. There's some exciting work and technologies and research happening in the human area. So trying to being able to measure both acute and chronic pain, and then linking that back to potentially repurposing pain relief products in the human field. And then we've got that traditional understanding of physiological responses to stress and pain as well. How then do we utilise all of that research to create, I guess, a single animal wellbeing index that's easily measured, easily captured, and potentially taken at the point of slaughter to understand the lifetime wellbeing of an animal? I think that's a really exciting area to explore for industry, and it would certainly fit with Red Meat 2030 and setting that standard for world best practice in animal health, welfare, and biosecurity. So I'll pull up there, Mick, and hand back to you to deal with any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, David. There's plenty going on in the welfare space, and look, we do have quite a few questions. We've only got a few minutes to go, so I might just pick out a couple. And as Jason mentioned up front, we will answer all questions, and we'll get those out to everyone post the webinar. I'll just start off, Doug McNicholl, if you could take the first one. There's a lot of conflicting information out there. It's important for producers to know exactly what's going on. Has MLA got some clear publications on the current reality of where the red meat industry sits with regards to emissions? And can you comment as well on how the decline in the herd impacts how the emissions are recorded as well, please? That might be a good place to start.
Cool. Yeah, excellent question. First place to start. In response, Mick, if you jump on our website, CN30 webpage, we've got an infographic that shows the latest progress over time. And at the bottom of that page, through our recently released, as of today, Carbon Neutral 2030 Roadmap, is a detailed explanation of how the numbers come together and what they mean for different parts of the industry using the current accounting framework that we utilise. So that should go a long way to helping direct people to the source of truth, so to speak, for the CN30 initiative and help inform those conversations. To the second point, Mick, about change in herd or flock levels and where that flows through into our emissions account. Important to note that the 2005 baseline year for the Carbon Neutral 2030 initiative was set with some assumptions around 10-year rolling herd and flock averages. So at that time, it was 25 million cattle, 60 million goats, 50 million sheep, and a half a million goats. If you consider the herd and flock, well, MLA's latest stats showing that cattle are back around 25, 26 million. I think sheep are around 64. And I think the goat population's bumped up. The change over time hasn't reflected any dramatic reduction in the flock or the herd. So that's an important message for industry, is that we're not interested in that pathway. We're really interested in driving technologies that enable productivity and profitability and deliver some of those multiple win-wins for producers. So there's been no results driven by reductions in herd and flock.
Thanks for that, Doug. Fiona, there's a couple of questions here for you, and I might just wrap them up together because they're related. Once you've reached your maximum carbon storage capacity with mature trees, how do you go about offsetting emissions then? And related to that is your soil test. Is it a standard 10 centimetre soil test for soil carbon? And can you use that to quantify the change in soil carbon and then get credit for it?
Well, I might start with the last question first. Yeah, all our soil tests are 10 centimetres. And we work on the assumption from the CSIRO soil, I think it's accounting project, SCARP for short, that 50% of the soil carbon is in 30 centimetres is in the top 10 centimetres. So we extrapolate that to the 30 centimetres. And that's what we've used in our accounting system. We're not using a verified accounting system. We're using just the one that we've developed ourselves, but that's sort of going to be part of the MLA process, Carbon Neutral 2030 pilot project. We're sort of part of that. Now about the trees, look, also, I suppose it goes with the soil as well. Our farm is made up of owned and leased land, and some of that leased land has been previously cropped, and we've picked it up when it's no longer economic to crop, and we've picked up blocks where I think I'm just looking at one here. One of the soil carbons levels was 1.9%. So we've been able to capitalise on somebody else's low soil carbon as part of our farm program, and yeah, it will plateau out. We're still planting trees. I think that's an important part of what we do. We put in a couple of tree plantations this year because we're still subdividing paddocks to give us greater control with grazing. And also I think by planting out watercourses, we've had higher tree growth in those areas because they've got more water. But I think, yeah, we are facing it flattening off, and I'm hoping that some of the research in the future that MLA is doing with sort of feed additives and things like that and different pasture species will give us the next step for us. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fiona. And look, on behalf of all attendees, thank you to our panellists. We are pushing up against time, but we will get answers to the remaining questions out to everyone post the webinar. Thanks, everyone. Jason, I'll hand back to you to close the conference call. Thank you.
Thanks, Mick, and thanks, Michael, Doug, Fiona, and David. I think that was a great session and a really good overview of a pretty complex and detailed and broad-ranging topic. And as a number of the speakers mentioned, there's quite a few resources that we have on the MLA website, and those are being continually added to. So please have a look at those, or reach out to any of us individually to follow up. So there's 3 more webinars, so leading up to the annual general meeting, which is on November 19. So between now and then, there's 3 more. And you can visit the updates website, which is on the screen. They'll all be recorded and be able to access the recordings from the recording from today in the next 48 hours. There's also an option for filling in a survey if you look in the chat function. So thanks for taking the time to join us today. And as I said, there's a lot more in this topic, and please reach out for more information, either individually to the presenters or we'll have a look on the website for the resources that are there. So thanks for your time today, and look forward to seeing you on one of the other webinars next week. Thanks very much for your time.